Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have Madison Levine from Levine Hearing. She's the founder and she's a board certified hearing instrument specialist. And she'll be talking to you about the relationship between the inner ear and fall risk. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. We will be utilizing the chat box for any questions that you have. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's discussion, but if you have just like a burning question, feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll answer it at the end. But without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Madison here, and she'll tell you a little bit more about herself.
Hey everybody, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm so excited to be with you today. I'm so excited that I lost my voice this weekend. My little brother is having a baby. It's my first little nephew, and I lost my voice at the baby shower. I was that excited. So bear with me, and if you need me to repeat anything, please do use that chat box, and I'm happy to slow down and repeat. But yeah, to tell you a little bit about who I am. So my name's Madison. I founded a hearing clinic in 2015. So we're coming up on 8 years in South Charlotte. And over those years, my main focus has been hearing related. And you might be surprised to know how much the ear is actually related to our balance system. But I am so thrilled to get to share this with you today, because each one of you that learns this, you're going to then know it, and it might help you. And then you might get to share it with somebody else, and it might help them. And it's like the butterfly effect. We don't know how many people we're going to get to impact just by learning some of this information today. So thank you for taking your time out to learn with me. So to give you a little background, what is an audiologist? I don't know if you can see. Can everybody see my screen okay? Okay, great. An audiologist is a professional who has a doctorate, who specializes in hearing loss and treatment, and also in balance and dizziness diagnostics. So this is twofold. When you think about the inner ear, most people think about hearing, but they don't really think about balance. But it turns out the inner ear is our gyroscope. It is the thing that tells us where we are moving in space. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit to you guys, I am not an expert on Parkinson's, but my clinic, we are experts on balance, dizziness, imbalance treatment, and even physical therapy for that balance. So we see a lot of people who have Parkinson's, and it's really interesting to see how some symptoms may be coming directly from Parkinson's disease, but what if you also have other symptoms that are separate that could be treated that are not related directly to the disease? So I hope today we can kind of weed those out together so that you can see possibly where you might be able to get a little bit of benefit from a clinic like a balance clinic. So here we are in 2023, and this clinic has expanded so that now we have a full balance suite. And the way this really came about was that my husband, 2 years ago, he popped up with a vertigo. And I don't know if anybody here has had vertigo before, or you know somebody who's had vertigo, but man, is it uncomfortable. And so the first thing I did was, remember, we weren't doing balance in my clinic yet. We were just focused on hearing at that time. So the first thing I did was I sent him to a little independent ENT clinic, ear, nose, and throat clinic, to get tested and treated. Well, they booked an appointment for him, but their equipment was broken. So they couldn't really do anything for him. So then we waited another couple months to get an appointment with a big ENT. They never could get back to us with a diagnosis, couldn't really get our paperwork. It was just a runaround. And so my husband looked at me and he said, "You've got to do this, because people who are experiencing balance issues are struggling to find the right place where they're going to get help quickly." So in May of last year, 2022, We did a lot of prep work before that, but in May we opened the balance clinic. And what we did was we invested in some big equipment that you would find at Duke, the Mayo Clinic, at Johns Hopkins. And this is stuff that really helps us diagnose what's really going on in the balance system. And it's been incredible. The referrals immediately started coming in, and we've been able to help so many people with their balance issues. So you can see this team has grown, the clinic has grown. And so let's go back and let's talk a little bit about what are we really doing here? So you may not know the number one complaint in a primary care physician's office for a person over 70 is actually dizziness. This is so common for so many reasons. And what we find though is that when people use the word dizzy, it can mean different things for different people. And so the first thing that your doctor is going to do is they're going to check your blood pressure. Oftentimes we know low blood pressure can lead to feelings of lightheadedness. They're going to look at your prescriptions. They're going to see if any of them have side effects that include dizziness or imbalance. And they're going to see if you have any prescriptions that might be interacting together. After that, typically, the primary care provider is going to refer you to neurology or maybe to cardiology. And I can tell you from experience, I have spent this year doing talks like this in dozens of physicians' offices because I want to educate them on how we can assist their patients. Let me tell you, neurology and cardiology, they do not want to be the first referral because they usually are not the answer. 85% of dizzy disorders originate in the inner ear. 85%. So it's interesting that most primary care providers, the first thing they're going to do is send you to neurology. When the reality is, audiology would solve it way more times than neurology would on a first go. And so, I'm going to the neurologist so that they know they can refer back to us when they need to. And I'm educating the primary care doctors so that they send you to the right place in the first place. So let's get into it a little more. So when you do approach your doctor and you say, I'm feeling dizzy, there are so many different words that we might use, and the doctor's trying to figure out, what do you really mean by that? So, of course, dizziness can be feeling lightheaded, feeling like the environment is moving a little bit. Vertigo is really taking that to the next level. That's where you have the illusion of you or the room spinning or whirling. Disequilibrium is more like a disturbance in your coordination. And so as I'm going through these, you guys may recognize some of the things that go hand in hand with Parkinson's disease also go hand in hand with just inner ear disorders. And so in the event that you haven't had your inner ear system really tested, it's possible that you could have some parts of imbalance and dizziness and vertigo that could be treatable, just like the general population, separate from Parkinson's disease. I think that's really important for us to separate, that they can be separated sometimes. So after we've kind of defined what's going on as far as what type of symptoms, what are some of the causes that the general population is going to have that are going to affect their balance? You can have true vertigo. And I'm excited today because that's what I'm really going to go into, is I'm going to explain true vertigo to you. You can also have motion sickness, migraines, and it might surprise you to know that there's such a thing as a vestibular migraine. Vestibular basically means your inner ear balance system. So you can migraine in your inner ear and you don't necessarily have a headache. You can just have feelings of dizziness, and it's actually that part of your body migraining. It's one of the least diagnosed, but really important to find, because people will go with those symptoms for so long, and it can be treated as a migraine. Low blood pressure, like we talked about, cardiovascular disease, low iron, hypoglycemia, and autoimmune disorders. So here's some of the common diagnoses. Acoustic neuroma, this can actually be a tumor that can be growing in the ear. Barotrauma, that's when you go scuba diving and you come up too fast and people get real sick. The one I'm going to go into deeper today is benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, and that is BPPV. It's kind of fun to say, it's kind of a tongue twister, but hopefully by the end of the day, you're going to know exactly, even if you say BPPV, that's fine, you're going to know what it is. And that is that feeling of true vertigo. You can have actual malformations in your inner ear where something is not formed correctly. We see a lot of labyrinthitis and vestibular neuritis in my office, and that's part of why we have such fancy equipment, is to really get down to the right diagnosis so we can treat that dizziness. Mal-day debarkment. Have you ever gotten off of a boat and you still felt like you were moving? That is a bad disembarkment from the boat, and that was a mal-day debarkment. Meniere's disease. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Meniere's, but I see it, the term is commonly used and sometimes without actually having a formal diagnosis. It's kind of interesting. I'll have someone come into the office and say, oh yeah, I was diagnosed with Meniere's disease years ago, so I have vertigo once a month. Sometimes people weren't actually diagnosed with Meniere's. They may have just verbally told their primary care doctor they were having some vertigo, and that doctor said, it's probably Meniere's. Or they Googled it and they decided that's what they have. But Meniere's is very specific. Meniere's is actually a trifecta. You have to have all three to really diagnose it because there's not a test for it. It's basically vertigo, fluctuating hearing loss that goes up and down, and tinnitus, which is some type of sound in the ear, like ringing in the ears. Those three together are Meniere's. And then, like we talked about, you can actually have that migraine happening in the inner ear. So here's what I'm excited to share with you today is BPPV. You don't have to say the long version. You can use the acronym like we do. It is so much more common than we realize. Half of us in our lifetime are going to experience BPPV. Regardless of what other diagnoses you have, half of us are going to have it at some point. This is that true vertigo. And vertigo like this can come on from severe events like head trauma, a car accident, a fall. But unfortunately, it can happen with really benign issues like bending over to tie your shoes, rolling over in the morning to get up out of bed. I don't know if you or someone you know has ever experienced vertigo where they say, I just woke up in the morning, I got up and the room was spinning. There's nothing to point to say that really caused it, but it can possibly be BPPV. And what's amazing about this is this type of vertigo is so easily treated. And that's why I want y'all to know about this, is if this hits you, we can actually fix it so fast if you get to the right place soon. So let's talk a little bit about anatomy. So if you'll bear with me, we're going to geek out just a little bit, okay? So as you're looking at this drawing of the ear, you see the ear on the outside, the part that we all know. As you look down the ear canal, it's just a tunnel. And at the end, you see that kind of blue semicircle labeled tympanic membrane. That's just your eardrum. And it's funny because a lot of people really are not familiar with the anatomy of the ear. Nothing can go past that eardrum. Okay, so when you go swimming, you take a shower, nothing's going into your head, right? the water may flow down to the eardrum and it flows back out and bounces right off. That is, unless you have a hole in your eardrum, which you would know. The only way you have a hole is if you've had an ear infection that has potentially swollen to the point that it might have burst your eardrum. It's very uncommon. So behind that little blue semicircle, you can see these 3 tiny bones. And I don't know if y'all remember elementary school. These are the 3 tiniest bones in the body: the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. By their more common names, you might remember them as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. I don't know why we need to have 2 sets of names, but you probably know the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup a little better. Once you get past that stapes there, you see this big snail shell. The cochlea is really where we're hearing. That's where, if you've ever heard about hair cells in the ear that can get damaged by aging, by loud noises, those hair cells get hurt. They are lining the inside of that snail shell. Now, when you look just to the top of the cochlea, the top and to the left, there's a couple loops. You can see 3 little loop-de-loops up there. That is your balance system, and that's what we're really talking about today. I wanted to show you this because I want you to see that the hearing mechanism and the balance mechanism are attached. They're sitting right next to each other. That's why an audiologist is an expert in both of them. So you see these loops. Let's zoom in on the loops a little more. So here we go. Here's another view of the 3-dimensional of the loops. So I don't know if you've ever heard when someone's had vertigo, they might be told, oh, the crystals in your inner ear are out of place, and we need to get those crystals back into place. That's true. And it kind of sounds like voodoo, doesn't it? Like, what do you mean I've got crystals in my ear? What is that about? It's true. So you see these crystals down in the bottom of the screen. They're floating. Hold on. Did you guys all have your phones go off at the same time? I don't know if you knew this. There was a national alert test today on every single phone across the country. So sorry, my phone just went off. Yours might have too. So here we are, we're looking at these loops. The crystals are floating in fluid. So think of them like lightweight little rocks, and they're floating in fluid. So when you move forwards, those little rocks hit the front of the loop. When you move backwards, they bounce off the back of the loop. When you do a somersault, they move around through the loop. Our bodies are so incredible. This is how your brain knows where you are in space. This is how it knows that you're moving forward or backward, is how those crystals are tapping the front and tapping the back. Now, what can go wrong is that a little crystal can get out of the correct loop and it can get into the wrong loop. This is what we're talking about when a crystal is out of place. And like I said earlier, it can be from something major like a head trauma, and it can be so silly, like you just turned your head fast. Unfortunately, those minor reasons that can trigger this become more and more common as we get older. So in our 20s and 30s, it's likely that we would not get a crystal out of place unless we had something traumatic happen. But as we get older, things just get loosey-goosey, and unfortunately, it can happen a lot easier. So if you've heard of the crystals getting out of place, you may have also heard that someone's been told, look up a video online or take these papers home with you and try these exercises and it'll get the crystal back in place. It might get it in place, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Some of the worst cases of vertigo that I see in the office are because you had some vertigo, tried to self-treat at home, And now you got the wrong crystals and the wrong loops like crazy. And now it is way more work for us to get them back in the right loop-de-loops. So I highly recommend not self-treating at home. Unless you're stuck out of town, about to get on a flight tomorrow, like you're stuck and you can't go anywhere and you've got to try something, you can try it at home yourself. But if you can get to a doctor's office, they will much more effectively treat you. And what's awesome is how fast it works. So 95% of cases are resolved in one visit, one treatment. That remaining 5% might be toughies, and it may take 2 or 3 treatments to get it resolved. So what we would literally do in the office is we do testing to figure out which crystal is in which loop, which is pretty complicated, but for us, it's pretty easy. Once we figure out where we're out of place, then we can figure out exactly how to maneuver the body to literally move your head around so that the crystal floats back into the right space. Sounds like voodoo, but I'm telling you, it's true, it really works. So you guys know that fall risk rises every year as we get older. And more than 1 out of 4 Americans over 65 falls each year. And we know when we have a fall, all the repercussions, the likelihood of hospitalization, broken bones, all the things that come with that. So we want to reduce that risk in every way possible. Here's what's crazy. 9% of people over 65 have undiagnosed BPPV. And remember, BPPV is vertigo. It's the crystals out of place in the ear. So we have nearly 10% of our seniors are walking around experiencing some type of vertigo symptoms that they can't get resolved and they don't know what to do next. Because on average, it takes 500 days for someone to get to the right provider and get the correct diagnosis and treatment. Because like I said, your primary care provider is yet to learn from me that they should send it to audiology first. So they send it neurology, cardiology, you go around in circles, and 500 days later, you finally figure out it was BPPV and we can treat it. So whether this applies to you or to a friend, this is what I'm so excited for you guys to know, is that there can be help for vertigo when we get the right diagnosis. Now, I'm going to shift gears just a little. I'm going to go in a different direction. Johns Hopkins has been doing an immense amount of studying about hearing loss. Dr. Frank Lin there has just made incredible strides for us in the last couple decades. He has found that an untreated hearing loss is correlated with 3-fold increase in fall risk. Now, this kind of sounds crazy. Why would having trouble with your hearing make you more likely to have a fall? He has hypothesized a lot of reasons for this. One is that when we are needing to pull focus from one area of the brain to another, when you're having trouble getting the clarity of words, when you're having trouble deciphering who's speaking at a time when you're in background noise, you're using energy to pull in that direction. We're pulling away from other parts of the brain. And it absolutely contributes to cognitive decline over time because of that energy having to push into that area. It also pulls away from our ability to balance. And just so you know, this study, they were looking at degrees of hearing loss. So a mild hearing loss, somebody might tell me, oh, I do fine when I'm talking one-on-one with people, when they're facing me. But if you put me in a little background noise, I really have a little trouble with clarity. That's a mild hearing loss usually. That mild hearing loss has this 3-fold increased risk in falls. When it goes to a moderate hearing loss, it increases to 4-fold. A severe hearing loss increases to 5-fold. So, as we're focused on the different areas that we want to take care of our health, we can't ever look at our bodies in a vacuum. We've got to look at the whole system. So when you've got an issue like Parkinson's disease and you've got these symptoms that surround it, we also have to look at the other systems that we can strengthen to make sure that if we're going to already have these certain issues, what else can we do to reduce risk everywhere that we can? And I would say getting balanced systems looked at to really get a real diagnosis and to uncover things like BPPV and to get your hearing tested so that you can treat it if it needs to be treated are ways to drastically reduce the risks that you can reduce. 85% of dizzy disorders originate in the inner ear. And that is a fact that you guys are among the few to know it so far. We're educating as fast as we can. And 40% of us are going to have true vertigo in our lifetime. The average patient sees 7 doctors over 500 days before they finally get resolution for those symptoms. And my mission is to reduce the number of days. I would like for people to get resolution the day of their symptoms, if not within the week. The healthcare costs, the mental load, the social costs of not being able to function because of having vertigo is significant. I want to cut down on it. So this is hopefully going to be helpful for you guys. It's a little different angle than maybe what you've thought about before. And I'm open to any and all questions that you might have about the hearing and the balance mechanism. I love answering questions. So please shoot away.
If you have any questions at this time, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, I have a question. If you're having balance issues, should you go first to an audiologist if that's 85%, or should you still start with your primary care?
I would suggest you always start with your primary care. I think that they are the quarterback of your care. So I want them to be in on the loop. But what you might find though is that you do have to kind of advocate for yourself as to where you want to be referred. So not every audiology clinic also does balance. There are audiologists that just focus on hearing. And so you want to make sure that you're picking one that also focuses on balance. But after your primary care has checked your blood pressure, checked your medications, they've looked at your history, they may need a little bit of a push, a suggestion, or a pushback. If they say, all right, I'm going to send you to neurology, you can ask them, can you explain that referral for me a little bit? Because it seems to me that balance related issues are more likely to be better served by an audiologist.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Kelly, did you have a question?
I'm trying to get it put in the chat, but I'll just ask it anyway.
Okay.
I happen to have had tinnitus for a long, long time. Is that related to having balance issues?
It is not. Thank you for that question. Tinnitus and the word tinnitus are the same thing, and there's no right way to say it. So you're saying it right. And what that really means is any sound that you're hearing in the ear that's not really happening in your environment. Some people hear ringing, buzzing, crickets, bells, music, chime. It can be all kinds of sounds. The reality is that it is coming from a damaged hearing mechanism. And it doesn't have to mean that anything is seriously wrong. For most people, it means that for most, 90% of the time, people who have tinnitus also have a hearing loss that goes along with it, even if it's just a mild hearing loss. And interestingly, we treat a lot of tinnitus in this office. Hearing aids, when there is a hearing loss, can drastically reduce the sound of the tinnitus for a couple reasons. And for people that don't need hearing aids or don't want them, there are some great coping mechanisms at home. There is nothing wrong with avoiding silence, using a sound machine at night, using a fan, playing music in the background. Those are great tools to just distract yourself from the sound. And I think it's also helpful when you're able to kind of be at peace that nothing's going really wrong. There's nothing really bad in your head. It's usually just a damaged system. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My last hearing test, the audiologist said that I was right on the cusp of needing hearing aids. When do you know that it's actually time to get a hearing aid?
Yeah. You know, my take is I like to say that I'm aggressively preventative. And in the first place, I would love to prevent hearing loss. I love fitting earplugs and educating people on noise damage. But once we have a hearing loss, actually treating it, actually wearing hearing aids is itself a method of prevention. We're preventing fall risk, cognitive decline, risk of depression and anxiety, all the things that we know are risk factors as a hearing loss progresses. So the way that I present it to patients is if they have any degree of hearing loss, then I'm going to recommend that a hearing aid can correct it. And they have to decide when they're ready. So the ball is really in your court, because if you have any, then you're a candidate for hearing aids. You have to decide when you're ready to cross that bridge and you want to A, make the investment, and B, you're going to actually wear them and use them so that you get the health benefits of them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I've also heard that, or had one audiologist tell me if I get hearing aids, be sure and get the one that goes on the back of the ear, not the one that's fully inserted into the ear. Why? I didn't get a chance to ask why. What's the feeling about that?
It depends on the type of hearing loss that you have.
Oh.
So I haven't seen your test, your audiogram, but it's really fascinating. The science of sound is so much more complicated than we give it credit for. I think even when I got into this profession, you just kind of think, let's just turn the volume up. If I'm having trouble hearing, let's just make it louder, right? But nobody wants to just wear a horn or something like we used to have, right? When we really think about the science of sound, what's happening is we have a piano keyboard. And that piano keyboard is starting with the low pitch notes to the mid notes to the high pitch notes. And when you start to lose your hearing, you don't lose it across the whole keyboard. You might lose it just for the top third of the notes. And so if I just make everything equally louder, that doesn't fix you. All you need louder is the top third. I don't need to make the bottom 2/3 louder. And so when you actually fit a hearing aid in the ear versus behind the ear, it completely changes the acoustics of what gets amplified. And it's pretty complicated. I love doing it on like a whiteboard to show you, So it might be hard to explain today, but that audiologist is exactly right. And I do highly recommend following their advice. If they say you need behind the ear, not in the ear, it's because if you wore an in the ear and you're not the right candidate for it, what likely would happen is other people would sound okay, but you would hear your own voice like you had your fingers in your ears and like you were in a cave. And you can't tolerate that for very long. So that's kind of my big and my little answers. There definitely are real reasons for it, and it's more complicated than my voice can explain.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name's Peter. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I was a career artilleryman in the military, and I was diagnosed with tinnitus, but and I guess I've had that for many years now from all the loud environment that I was in. And I always notice that my balance is it's worse when there's a lot of noise going on, like in the environment. So I always my balance is better when I'm alone and it's quieter. But whenever I'm in an environment that's loud, it seems like I'm more kind of wobbly and my balance is off. Does that kind of make sense, or is that?
Yes, absolutely. It does. You know, our ability to locate where sound is coming from is because our ears, you know, a sound in space is hitting one ear a millisecond before it hits the other ear. And again, our brains are just incredible that we're able to sense things this way. So when you're in a lot of background noise, you are getting pinged from sounds from all different directions. And if you have any degree of hearing loss, it's likely not exactly the same in each ear either, because our bodies aren't the same on each side and we don't age equally. So you're off a little, and then you add different noises pinging you. It's very common to feel a little off balance in background noise. And that is something that I will say that hearing aids to some extent can improve it. Because for one thing, we're at least balancing so that the ears are hearing at exactly the same volumes.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I have, when I lay my head down on the pillow, on one side, I can hear my heartbeat very, very loudly. And the other side, I can hear it, but not as much if I lay on my left side. I've been to the ear doctor. They've done a carotid artery test. They did something else to look at my brain. Is that anything that you can do anything about? What do you think that's all about?
Well, my first question would be, do you also notice that you hear differently with one ear on the pillow, or just that you're hearing your own sounds differently?
I don't know, because I haven't tried to hear for anything else. It feels like my heartbeat is inside my ear,
Yeah.
very loud. So I often have to sleep on my left side just to get to sleep,
Got it.
because it's so loud. I can't concentrate on falling asleep.
That's hard. You know, without doing tests, it's hard to know. I'm so glad that they've checked your carotid. They've done that. There's a condition called a third window issue, and it's basically that a piece of skin is thinner than it should be, and it's not causing any problems long term, but exactly what you're saying, hearing that sound is very common with a third window issue. And there's really nothing to do to fix it.
Do you think a sound machine would cover the sound, even though the sound seems to be coming from my ear?
I think it would. I think it's distracting, and distraction is good. My favorite noise machine is the Dome, DOHM. They are $25 on Amazon, and it really is a fan. And you can change by turning it, you can make it lower or higher pitch. It doesn't blow air at you, it's just a fan that makes a sound. So it's a very natural sound, and people love it. I have a Dome in everyone's bedroom at my house, and we don't travel without at least 2 domes. So,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely.
We actually have a question here in the chat box. And it's from Charles. He says, I don't have balance problems while standing unless I close my eyes or I'm in a dark room. The unsteadiness disappears when I open my eyes or turn on the lights. Is this treatable condition or just a function of getting old?
Most likely it's treatable. And it's exactly what we do. And that is one of the most common complaints we hear. In fact, it's the first test we do on you. The first most basic test is basically having you stand near a wall with supports near you with a spotter, a person ready to make sure you don't fall. And we have you march in place with your eyes open. And then we have you stay marching in place with your eyes closed. And it's one of the first indicators that we're having an inner ear issue. And it usually is treatable. And so I would highly recommend having vestibular testing done. And like in an office like ours, we are in network for Blue Cross, United, Medicare, several Advantage plans. And in larger ENT clinics, if that's closer to you, you can also seek it out there as well. So you may be able to get insurance coverage for your exam.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. What do you know about the speech vibe device that is being promoted for Parkinson's as a method of addressing the speech issues that go along with it?
You know, Kelly, I wish that I knew. In my specialty, I'm only connected to hearing and balance. And going through school, it's interesting that the speech pathologists and the audiologists start school together and then they split off from each other as they get deeper into their professions. So I'm sorry, I don't know much about speech or what might be available now.
And I'll actually add to that, Kelly. Kelly, just to kind of answer your question a little bit. So we actually have had a speech language pathologist talk about speech vibe just a few months ago from Atrium. And so I will follow up with you after and send you the link to that recording, as well as the contact information for the therapist as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Do we have any other questions? Let me check the chat box here. Okay, not seeing anything else in the chat box.
I'll give you one more question.
Okay.
I've been doing therapy for my balance issues, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of progress with that. I have issues with my body pitching forward and walking probably on the balls of my feet more than I should. And I pick up speed and I don't stop till I crash into something or fall on the ground.
Okay. That's tough.
is that I've been doing the exercises with the therapist for the big steps and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that helps. But it'd be real good. I'm not the best at keeping up with that. I still work full time. And it's just not always fun to go when I get up in the morning before my cinematic kicks in and I end up busting into doors and counters and catch myself.
You know, I'm so glad that you've been doing therapy for it. And I can understand the frustration of not seeing progress or not seeing enough progress. I would venture to guess, though, that doing no therapy might be a more dangerous choice because it could be helping you to some extent right now. You may have a wonderful therapist. At some point, if it was me, I might question if I might try another therapist, because different therapists are trained in different ways. And I wouldn't want you to be stuck with one forever and never see benefit if there was a possibility that it just wasn't the right method for you. But I also wouldn't want you to quit just because it wasn't helping enough and then it turns out it was helping some. So my best advice would be make sure you play it out with the current therapist and then maybe think about trying someone with a little different specialty. That's my recommendation.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I have hearing aids that I haven't worn for quite a while because my ears itch so much and the hearing aids make the itching worse. Now I've tried drops, I forget what they're called, Miracle Ear or something like that. And it doesn't help enough. So the hearing aids are just sitting there.
Oh, I hate it. I'm so sorry. I hear this pretty often. And you probably tried Miracell are the drops.
Yes.
It's just a good moisturizer. So without seeing you myself, here are the things that I check. I look to see if it's dryness, and then maybe we try a moisturizer like a Miracell. I look at the fit of the hearing aid to see if it's wiggling around and tickling. I try to make sure it's got a very secure, tight fit. Sometimes I go so far as to make a custom mold of the ear instead of just an earbud, because if we can get something solid just sitting there and not moving around, then it's less likely to tickle and itch. And then I also push people really hard to wear them for 7 days straight, all day, every day, and deal with the itching. Because more often than not, I see people completely get over the hump. And it's like their ear is almost rejecting the newness until they get over the hump, and then it gets better. But then if they stop wearing them for a couple days, it's hard to get back over the hump again. Yeah. So those are my main things: moisturizer, fit, and then just making yourself wear them.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Let me check the chat box here. Okay. Nothing there. Well, I guess there are no other questions. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Madison, for this lovely presentation. And just to let everyone know, this session was recorded and will be available on our YouTube by the end of the week. So you can check back later for that recording. But again, thank you all for joining us today and taking time out of your Wednesday. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you guys so much. We made it with this voice. We made it all the way through. I hope y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Jennifer. Bye, Sandra, Christine.